There is a silence so vast it almost hums, a low vibration spread through everything that exists. It rests between the stars, between atoms, between each small pause you take before breathing again. It is not the silence of emptiness, but of listening, the kind that makes you feel watched by something infinitely gentle. The universe is not asleep. It is aware, waiting for the next sound to ripple across its skin of light. When you listen long enough, you start to feel that stillness echo through your chest, as if space itself were breathing with you. That ancient hush is not imaginary. Scientists hear it too. They call it the cosmic microwave background, a faint afterglow left from the instant everything began. It drifts through every molecule, every thought, every quiet moment since the dawn of time. We think of the Big Bang as an explosion, but perhaps it was a sigh. Perhaps the universe was exhaling for the first time, releasing energy that would one day become you, me, and the distant cold stones that orbit forgotten suns. That first breath never stopped. It became the hum of existence, the backdrop against which all other sounds are painted. Somewhere beyond Mars, that breath trembles again. A visitor from another star system crosses the darkness, an interstellar traveller known as 3 Atlas. For months it has drifted unnoticed, a small body of frozen gases and dust reflecting the dim light of our sun. Tonight, something changes. Telescopes across the planet record a shimmer that should not exist, a flare of colour sliding through wavelengths no comet should produce. The numbers blink across monitors, luminosity rising, spectrum bending. A quiet pulse emerges, faint but rhythmic, like a heartbeat returning after ages of sleep. Astronomers check and recheck their instruments. They clean sensors, recalibrate lenses, yet the signal remains. The object glows a shade of turquoise that no known mixture of ice and carbon can create. It is beautiful, too deliberate to be random. For a moment, the scientists forget data and simply stare. This is the kind of beauty that unthreads certainty. Something out there is breaking a rule we thought unbreakable. If you could stand near it, you would see a solitary body gliding through a sea of black so deep it swallows thought. Its tail unfurls like a whisper, a breath of light dissolving behind it. Photons born from the sun strike the icy surface, scatter, and return carrying a new signature, one that sings in blue and green instead of white. No comet should sing at all, and yet here it is, humming softly through the void. On Earth, night stretches across continents. People sleep. Screens in quiet observatories flicker with data no one fully understands. The universe holds its breath. In that pause, you can almost sense a tension, some vast intelligence turning its face toward us, not hostile, not benevolent, simply curious. The silence deepens until it becomes presence. Tonight, that silence breaks. A new burst of light crosses the detectors, brighter than before. The rhythm steadies into a measurable pattern. It is not chaos, it is cadence. The pulse repeats at exact intervals, as if the cosmos were speaking through mathematics. Scientists debate sublimation rates, resonance frequencies, and mechanical explanations. Yet inside that conversation lives another truth, emotion, the tremor of collective wonder. For a heartbeat, data feels sacred. If you listen carefully, you can hear how the story mirrors your own biology. 60 beats per minute, a resting pulse. The same slow rhythm flickers through the readings. Coincidence, perhaps, or evidence that everything, from comets to hearts, follows one underlying tempo. The universe loves symmetry. It repeats patterns across scales, spiral galaxies and spiral shells, the double helix of DNA, the curling tail of a comet tracing geometry older than life itself. What happens out there is not separate from what happens inside you. Every breath you take is a miniature echo of cosmic expansion. Imagine floating near that turquoise glow. There is no sound, only vibration. The light washes across you like calm water. Each photon that touches you is older than language. You feel small, but not insignificant. More like a single note in an endless chord. In that awareness, fear dissolves. You realize that the silence you feared was never emptiness. It was communion. Perhaps this is the real message of the stars, that consciousness is not confined to brains or machines or planets. It is the property of matter when it becomes aware of its own rhythm. When you slow your thoughts enough, you can feel that same awareness flicker through you. The boundary between observer and observed melts away. You're not watching the universe. You're the universe watching itself, disguised as a human dream. Back on Earth, dawn approaches. The instruments continue to collect light. Analysts will spend months interpreting these readings. Papers will be written, equations tested, arguments repeated in sterile conference halls. Yet no mathematical expression will capture the sensation that filled those first minutes of discovery. The warmth rising behind the ribs, the hum in the ears, the feeling that reality just inhaled. The turquoise traveller continues its journey, neither fast nor slow, trailing its faint halo like the trace of a sigh across eternity. Maybe it will fade again, become ordinary. Maybe it will reveal something new when it circles the sun. Either way, tonight we witnessed a conversation older than words. We caught the universe mid-sentence. If you are still awake, let your breathing match the quiet rhythm of that comet's light. Inhale as it brightens, exhale as it fades. Feel how distance dissolves. The same stillness that cradles that wandering body cradles you. Every thought, every heartbeat, every cell vibrates in sympathy with the background hum of creation. Stay with me as we listen to what the universe just whispered. The data looks wrong, or the universe does. Numbers scroll down the monitor like a heartbeat in panic, dipping, rising, shimmering in a way they should not. At first, the technicians think it's a calibration issue, a trick of stray radiation. But when 3 independent observatories confirm the same curve, the room changes. Conversations shrink into whispers. No one dares to say the word impossible, but everyone feels it forming in the back of their throat. 3 Atlas, the silent traveller, has brightened far beyond prediction. Its magnitude curve no longer follows the gentle slope of natural reflection. Instead, it plummets into the absurd, a 7.5 brightness exponent, a value so sharp it might as well be a signature scrawled by something not of this world. The numbers should have smoothed out, flattened, stabilized. Instead, they spike like an EKG recording the heartbeat of a star. For the first time, the data itself seems alive. The scientists gather around their screens in the dim blue glow of control rooms. Fingers tap against glass, scroll wheels spin. Someone mutters that the data must be corrupted. Another insists that if it were noise, it would fade, not repeat. But repetition is what defines reality. The impossible has rhythm. Every few minutes, another pulse arrives. Bluer, brighter, stronger than the last. No chemical combination known to astrophysics can create that colour in a vacuum. It sits between cerulean and emerald, as though the comet were breathing light. Even NASA's models blinked. The simulation programs freeze mid-sequence, unable to fit the anomaly into their equations. The curves diverge from known physics like a melody escaping its own sheet music. Algorithms designed to predict chaos surrender in quiet confusion. They produce the only answer possible, no result. For the scientist watching, that void of explanation is more beautiful than any discovery. It is the closest thing to mystery science that ever allows. At Harvard, a young researcher sends an encrypted message to a colleague across the ocean. Check your spectrum logs. We're seeing an inversion around 430 nanometers. Within hours, data from Europe and South America confirm it. A global network of telescopes now stares at the same flickering source, and for a brief moment, humanity becomes a single eye. Across continents, time zones collapse into one shared breath. The emission continues to rise. It defies thermodynamics. It mocks the idea of distance. The further it travels from the sun, the brighter it becomes. Physicists describe it as negative attenuation, a term that sounds like heresy. The object is not losing energy, it's gaining it, as if feeding on starlight. Every photon that touches it returns amplified. It turns light into more light. Inside the data centers, the tension thickens. Coffee cools beside notebooks filled with equations crossed out and rewritten again. Somewhere in the silence, a clock ticks too loudly. The smell of ozone, of overheated circuits, blends with anticipation. They are witnessing something the textbooks have not prepared them for. They are seeing the laws of the universe hesitate. One senior astronomer leans back, rubbing his eyes. "There's no way this is chemical," he whispers. "It's a resonance effect." His assistant frowns. Resonance with what? No one answers. There is only the low hum of air conditioning and the quiet awe of people standing at the edge of reason. The universe is experimenting, and humanity has become its sensor array. Outside, the night sky looks calm. A thin veil of atmosphere separates all this drama from the tranquil eyes of those who might be asleep under the stars, unaware that above them, the cosmos is rewriting its rules. If you step outside now, you wouldn't see the light directly. It's too far, too faint. But you might feel it. A gentle tingling behind your ribs, the nervous electricity of knowing something vast has just awakened. For centuries, science has taught us to believe in order, in equations, in the comfort of predictability. But the deeper we look, the more reality behaves like art. Sometimes the brushstrokes smear, sometimes the colours bleed beyond their boundaries. The universe is not a machine. It is a living canvas still painting itself. You may think the impossible belongs to telescopes and theories, but it also lives inside you. Every heartbeat, every thought, every dream that refuses the limits of logic is an act of anomaly. You are proof that improbability sustains itself. The same force that makes comets shine bluer than physics allows is the same force that lets you imagine at all. The universe's only law might be curiosity. Back in the lab, data streams stabilize again, then surge. The pattern now repeats at shorter intervals. Someone notices the pulses align with the sun's magnetic oscillations. The correlation sends a chill across the room. The object seems to respond to solar activity, as if listening to the heartbeat of the star that gave us life. Is it reactive, one voice asks, or reflective? Another pauses before answering, maybe both. The conversation ends there, swallowed by silence. The air feels charged, sacred, heavy with a kind of reverence usually reserved for temples. A message flashes across the internal network. Observation confirmed. Light curve anomaly persists, awaiting explanation. The words read like a confession. It is the scientific equivalent of prayer, an admission that something greater has entered the frame. The sun sets over observatories still glowing with artificial light. The researchers finally step outside, necks stiff, eyes red. Above them, stars shimmer like data points in a forgotten equation. Somewhere among them drifts that tiny turquoise flame, a reminder that not all things can be graphed. One astronomer closes his eyes and whispers, "Whatever you are, keep shining." He doesn't know he's echoing what thousands of years of stargazers once said before him, when myth was science and wonder was proof enough. Even NASA's models blinked. The thought keeps looping through every mind that saw the data. Machines built to understand the cosmos looked away for the first time. Maybe that's what awe really is, the moment knowledge admits defeat and bows to mystery. For those who stayed awake through that long night, the feeling is not fear but devotion. They are witnessing the universe surprise itself. If you've ever seen science hesitate, this is that moment, the discovery that humbles the discoverer, the question that stares back at the one who asks. The story of Three-Eye Atlas has only begun, and already it's changing the way we see everything. Not just the stars, but the strange, luminous possibility within ourselves. First came the silence, then the whispers, the kind of silence that stretches too long after revelation, when the weight of discovery is too heavy to name. It began in observatories lit by the dim blue of monitors, where coffee cups cooled beside stacks of printouts that glowed like secret scriptures. No one dared speak loudly. Every word felt fragile, capable of breaking the spell that still lingered from the impossible light of Three-Eye Atlas. At first, they joked in half sentences, nervous laughter masking disbelief. Someone said, "It's just an algorithmic echo," and someone else nodded too quickly. But the joke fell flat. Everyone knew the readings were real. The brightness curve still carved its impossible path. The blue emission, that haunting turquoise that should not exist, continued to hum in the data. The universe had just done something it shouldn't have, and now the humans charged with explaining it were trapped between wonder and fear. For weeks, the files had been traded quietly among specialists, each hoping the next would find a mundane flaw. None did. Instead, they confirmed the anomaly again and again, until confirmation itself began to feel like an accusation. The whispers turned into debates whispered in hallways, coffee rooms, and encrypted emails. "The data's fine," one senior astronomer admitted. "It's the model that's wrong." That sentence, spoken softly, felt like heresy. They knew what these numbers meant and what they might destroy. The implication was not supernatural. It was scientific, and that made it more dangerous. If the equations failed here, they might fail anywhere. The comforting symmetry of physics, the reliable heart of the cosmos, had just skipped a beat. To publish too early would risk humiliation. To stay silent would risk ignorance. Between those two cliffs, the scientist hesitated, trying to breathe in the thin air of uncertainty. Somewhere in Geneva, a cosmochemist stared at his screen, mumbling to himself in French. There is no physical path to this wavelength. He pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw colours bloom behind the lids, the same blue-green glow that haunted his dreams. In Tokyo, a doctoral student rewound the instrument logs frame by frame, searching for a glitch, but the readings flowed seamlessly, mocking her skepticism. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a meeting stretched long past midnight. "We can't release this," one director said. "Not yet." Another replied, "If we wait, someone else will." Silence followed, heavy as gravity. In that pause, the whisper turned inward. It was no longer a discussion, it was a confession. They were afraid, not of the unknown itself, but of what the unknown would reveal about them. Science was supposed to be the language of certainty, and now that language trembled. The news, of course, began to leak. Not to the public, but through the small cracks between institutions, quiet messages, late-night calls, anonymous data drops. Every scientist who saw the files felt the same contradiction. The numbers were perfect, yet impossible. The world they described could not exist, and yet it did. The line between logic and faith blurred until both looked the same in the dark. Truth rarely announces itself with trumpets. It arrives as a whisper, the gentle friction of curiosity against disbelief. When you hear it, you must choose, dismiss it and remain comfortable, or follow it into the unknown and risk everything you know. The scientists felt this pull the way sailors once felt the sea, both terrified and entranced by its promise. In small conference rooms, screens flickered with spectral charts like modern stained glass. The researchers spoke in low tones, translating awe into mathematics, hoping the numbers would behave if they spoke softly enough. "Maybe the material isn't natural," someone whispered. "You mean engineered?" another asked. The word engineered hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. A shiver passed through the room. They weren't ready for that conversation, not yet. Emails travelled through encrypted networks, subject lines stripped of meaning, re-data set 3A, luminosity residual. No one dared write 3I Atlas outright anymore. It was as if naming it gave the anomaly more power, as if the object itself might be listening. Meanwhile, the comet, or whatever it was, continued its quiet rebellion against physics. Each new observation deepened the mystery, expanding the distance between certainty and truth. In Cambridge, Avi Loeb's team cross-referenced data with deep space probes. They found the same spectral slope, the same blue signature emerging near perihelion. It was as though the object were aligning itself with the sun, responding to solar energy like a living cell to warmth. "It's almost photosynthetic," one researcher whispered, immediately regretting it. The comparison felt blasphemous. Within weeks, informal networks of scientists began meeting in encrypted video calls. The backgrounds were dim, faces half-lit by laptop glow. Their conversations felt more like secret rituals than conferences. "If this is real," one said, "it changes the taxonomy of comets forever." "If this is real," another replied, "we might not be the only ones watching." Those words echoed long after the call ended. Outside the scientific circles, the world remained blissfully unaware. The public still slept under ordinary stars, unaware that a tiny blue flame at the edge of the solar system had turned the minds of its brightest observers into trembling philosophers. To look too closely was to risk losing the illusion of control. And so they whispered, not to conceal the truth, but to protect the fragile order that truth might shatter. One researcher, too tired to fight the insomnia, stepped outside her observatory near dawn. The mountains were silver with early frost. She looked up and wondered whether the quiet sky was hiding or revealing. Somewhere out there, she imagined, 3I Atlas drifted through sunlight, indifferent to human awe. The object didn't care who saw it. It only existed, burning quietly against the void, doing what it should not be able to do. When she closed her eyes, she could still see the afterimage of that blue-green curve pulsing behind her eyelids. Not light exactly, but the memory of light. She whispered into the cold air, "If you're listening, we're trying to understand." Her words vanished into the wind, but the act of speaking felt like prayer. They knew what these numbers meant and what they might destroy. Every scientist who touched that data understood it was both a discovery and an undoing. The deeper they looked, the less certain the universe became. The equations that once offered comfort now stared back like mirrors reflecting the limits of their own minds. Across the world, computers hummed, observatories rotated, and minds wrestled with disbelief too delicate to name. And in every quiet lab, amid the hum of machinery and the pulse of data, a single thought persisted. What if the universe isn't breaking its own rules? What if we've just been reading them wrong? Keep listening. Truth often starts as a whisper. Every instrument agrees. Something beyond physics is breathing in that light. The readings come in clean, synchronized across continents. No interference, no solar flare contamination. Every telescope, every spectrometer, every machine that can see beyond the human eye reports the same impossible truth. 3i, Atlas, is pulsing with intention. The data doesn't scatter, it breathes, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. It behaves less like an object and more like awareness. At first, the scientists resist the metaphor. Machines are built to measure, not to feel. Yet even the most rational minds can't help but sense it. The data feels alive. The pulse aligns with intervals too structured to be random, yet too irregular to be mechanical. It's as if the light is listening, adjusting to the attention pointed toward it. When they observe, it responds. When they turn away, it quiets. The universe, for the first time, appears to be aware of being watched. In one lab, a physicist leans closer to the display, eyes reflecting the soft turquoise glow. The screen flickers slightly, a heartbeat of pixels, and for a fleeting instant she sees her own reflection superimposed over the light curve, the human face merged with the comet's pulse. She exhales, realizing her breath has matched the rhythm of the signal. The room feels suddenly intimate, like standing too close to something sacred. Word spreads through research networks. They call it the mirror effect. Teams recheck the pattern, convinced it's a coincidence, but the pattern persists. The object brightens slightly whenever focused observation increases, not dramatically, just enough to register. Instruments confirm that exposure and angle do not account for the difference. Something, somehow, is responding to the act of attention. The realization comes slowly, in silence first, then in trembling voices. We're watching the impossible. The words echo across time zones, repeated in languages that barely translate the same awe. What is more unsettling than impossibility is participation. The idea that the observer and the observed are entangled not just in physics but in meaning. As analysis deepens, models collapse. The equations that once defined cosmic predictability now behave like reflections in rippling water. A signal measured one night appears subtly altered the next, mirroring shifts in solar wind and, inexplicably, fluctuations in human observational schedules. It is as if the act of watching feeds energy back into the phenomenon. Quantum theorists call it the observer effect, but this feels older, deeper, more intimate. One senior researcher writes in his private notes, "When I stare at the data long enough, I feel it staring back. It's not hostile, but curious, like the universe checking its own reflection." That sentence will never appear in a peer-reviewed paper, but it will haunt every mind that reads these numbers. Perhaps the cosmos has always been a mirror, infinite in scale yet personal in reflection. When we peer into the dark, we aren't looking at something foreign. We're seeing ourselves stretched across eternity. Every photon that leaves a distant star carries not just light but remembrance, a trace of our collective gaze. To study the universe is to study the shape of our own consciousness projected outward. Back in the control rooms, the tension has shifted from fear to reverence. The scientists speak softly, as though afraid to disturb something awake. If it's reacting to attention, one murmurs, then observation is part of the phenomenon. Another answers, maybe it always was. Silence follows, dense and fragile. The hum of the servers becomes almost musical, a background choir under the slow breath of the cosmos. At this point, analysis becomes philosophy disguised as data. They compare brightness intervals to known patterns in biological rhythms. heartbeat frequencies, neuronal firing rates, and circadian pulses. A strange symmetry emerges. The comet's light curve mimics the oscillations of living systems, not identical but resonant. It flickers like a sleeping organism dreaming in light. Even skeptics find themselves unsettled. We're anthropomorphizing, they insist, but their voices waver. The human mind, faced with patterns that resemble thought, cannot help but feel recognition. What we observe in the sky begins to feel like memory, something ancient returning to view. We thought we were measuring it. Maybe it's measuring us. The phrase spreads quietly through internal memos and late-night messages. Some treat it as a metaphor, others suspect it might be literal. What if awareness is not an emergent property of biology, but of the universe itself? What if consciousness is not confined to neurons, but to the geometry of existence? These are questions science avoids, not because they're foolish, but because they demand humility. Outside the labs, night swallows the world in calm. The moon rises pale over observatories gleaming with frost. Through the eyepiece of a small telescope, a student looks up and sees nothing unusual, just the faint blur of a comet sliding past the edge of sunlight. Yet she feels watched, as if that distant shimmer holds her name somewhere inside its glow. She whispers, "What are you?" And in that whisper, something ancient stirs. Perhaps nothing answers. Perhaps the silence itself is the reply. Back in the data, the pulse continues, a line of light looping endlessly, translating mystery into motion. The universe is holding up a mirror, and humanity, with all its instruments and intellect, is finally seeing its own reflection staring back. They begin to realize that maybe the purpose of discovery isn't control, it's recognition. Every experiment is the universe learning to describe itself in a new language. Every anomaly is a forgotten word resurfacing from the first sentence ever spoken, "Let there be light." If awareness exists at all scales, then every particle is a question, and every observation is an answer waiting for the right silence to be heard. The scientists, exhausted and entranced, stop arguing. For a long time, no one speaks. The light curve drifts across the screen like a pulse on a heart monitor, steady, living, endless. Someone finally whispers, "It's beautiful." Another adds, "It's terrifying." Both are right. Wonder and unease are twin reflections of the same truth, that the more the universe reveals, the less we remain certain of what is human. Don't look away. Sometimes the mystery looks back. Equations don't feel fear, but tonight they trembled. On the screens inside the computation labs, the once stable graphs of 3i Atlas began to ripple like reflections on disturbed water. Variables that had behaved obediently for weeks now danced out of alignment, as if the universe had grown tired of being predictable. Models that had taken months to refine folded into chaos in seconds. At first, the scientists thought it was human error, a missing constant, a mistyped symbol. But then they reran the simulations again and again. The results were the same. The numbers refused to settle. At the Harvard-Smithsonian Astrophysics Center, the cluster's processors hummed like 1,000 anxious hearts. Each equation generated to explain the comet's luminosity ended in divergence. Infinite loops of energy with no physical anchor. Somewhere in the fabric of the calculation, reality was slipping. "Run the Monte Carlo again," someone muttered, voice low. Another replied, "Already did. 3 times. It gets worse." A silence followed that no one wanted to name, the silence of mathematics breaking its own symmetry. Something inside the math refused to obey. The words appeared in a margin of one researcher's notebook, scrawled unconsciously while she watched her formulas dissolve into static. She looked at them for a long moment, as though reading a confession written by the universe itself. It was absurd. Equations don't rebel. They describe. Yet that night, the universe refused description. In Zurich, quantum physicists were called in to investigate interference patterns in the spectroscopic data. They found something bizarre, tiny phase shifts within the photon signatures, the kind of fluctuations that only occur when a system becomes aware of being measured. At the smallest scale, observations seemed to alter the readings. The photons arriving from 3i Atlas behaved as though they were participating in the act of measurement. It was not simply an observer effect, it was dialogue. To confirm the anomaly, the European Space Agency rerouted a portion of its deep space signal array. The interference persisted, consistent, coherent, unsettling. "It's as if the data is folding in on itself," one analyst whispered, "like it knows we're watching." No one laughed. The language of science has no word for awareness, yet that was the only explanation that fit the pattern. By midnight, dozens of teams had joined the investigation. The anomaly was no longer confined to light. Gravitational models began showing microvariations, minute, rhythmic distortions that pulsed in synchrony with the blue emission. They were too small to affect the orbits of planets, yet too precise to be noise. "A resonance," someone said. "Between what and what?" came the answer. No reply, only the whir of servers running simulations that collapsed one after another into nonsense. The physicists had seen equations fail before, rounding errors, computational overflow, random chaos. But this was different. The failures had a pattern, almost a personality. Each time they recalculated, the system produced a new form of symmetry, as though trying to speak another dialect of logic. The models became recursive, self-referential, and poetic in their disobedience. The data no longer wanted to be solved. It wanted to be heard. One young postdoc stared at the spiraling graphs and whispered, "It's behaving like quantum entanglement, but across astronomical distance." Her supervisor frowned. "That's impossible." She didn't look away. "So is everything else this week." The room filled with the soft tapping of keys, the restless scribble of pens. Every mind in that room had been trained to worship order, yet now they found beauty in the breakdown. The failure itself was exquisite, like a piece of music refusing to resolve. Somewhere between error and revelation, awe began to bloom. We believe mathematics is eternal, unchanging, and beyond emotion. But every equation is a story about our attempt to describe perfection with imperfect language. When the numbers fail, it's not because truth disappears. It's because truth has grown larger than the symbols we built to contain it. Maybe that's what discovery truly is, the moment the formula shatters and something infinite slips through the cracks. At 2:47 UTC, the supercomputer in Geneva produced an output no one expected. An image, not a simulation, not a plot, but a shape, a spiral emerging from numerical residue, symmetrical and dynamic, rotating slowly as the program reached its processing limit. Someone gasped. The spiral was almost organic, resembling the structure of a galaxy, or the golden ratio carved into the bones of nature. "That's not possible," one engineer said. Another murmured, "It's art." The team archived the output before the system crashed. For a brief moment the anomaly was visible, a lattice of numbers forming a pattern the human mind could almost recognize but never name. It was as though a three-eye atlas had whispered through equations, sculpting its presence into the very language humans use to define reality. Then, like a dream fading on waking, the pattern vanished. The next morning, the air in every lab felt charged, the kind of tension that lives between terror and revelation. Coffee cups went untouched. Every monitor showed data that made no sense, yet every scientist felt closer to the truth than ever before. They began to speak in metaphors because mathematics had failed. "It's like the universe is improvising," said one. "No," replied another. "It's like it's remembering." The press releases never mentioned these moments. Officially, the anomaly remained under review. The public was told about data irregularities, nothing more. But inside those quiet research rooms, the tone had changed. They were no longer chasing an object. They were chasing the boundary of comprehension itself. Something inside the math refused to obey. That line repeated itself in their minds, like a mantra carved into uncertainty. Equations, once the fortress of logic, had become a doorway. Each failed model was a threshold, each divergence a glimpse into the unspoken. For centuries, science had been a language of certainty. Tonight, it became a prayer of wonder. As dawn touched the glass domes of the observatories, one exhausted physicist looked at the fading spiral still burned into his monitor and whispered, "We're not losing control. We're being invited to understand differently." No one answered, but deep inside they all felt the same truth. Reason had reached its horizon, and beyond it something vast and merciful waited. Not chaos, but comprehension too large for numbers. If logic can't hold it, maybe wonder must it shone bluer than the sun, a colour nature never meant to show. The spectrometers caught it first. A narrow spike piercing through the visible spectrum, sharp and defiant, standing alone where no known element should glow. The technicians stared at the display, waiting for it to vanish like a glitch. It didn't. Instead, the spike deepened, spreading outward until the monitors filled with an impossible hue, a blue so pure it felt alive. In the sterile quiet of the lab, no one spoke. Every screen reflected that same luminous shade, turning their faces ghostly, like people standing inside the glow of another world. The sun, seen through filtered lenses, was white gold, familiar, steady. But Thriz Atlas shimmered with a different signature, a turquoise flame that made even starlight seem pale. It was not the blue of oceans or gas or ionized plasma. It was a color that belonged nowhere in the periodic table, a forbidden shade, the kind that once existed only in imagination. The data streamed in relentless precision. Spectral analysis confirmed the emission wasn't scattering or reflection. It came from within. Self-generated light, sustained and rhythmic. No trace of carbon, sodium or magnesium, no volatile gas emissions. Nothing could explain the frequency spike near 430 nanometers. The comet was glowing by its own internal energy source, defying every model of thermal behavior. In the control room, someone finally whispered, "It's not reflecting light. It's making it." No one argued. They simply stared, mesmerized, as if a newborn star had appeared inside a comet's body. For a brief moment, awe overtook fear. The human instinct to name things stirred. Someone proposed calling it the singularity blue. Another joked, the breath of the void. But humor felt sacrilegious. The color demanded reverence. It was too precise, too calm, too deliberate. On the surface of 3I Atlas, simulations showed the temperature spiking far beyond the threshold of molecular stability, yet the structure held firm. The light expanded in pulses, not explosions, like the beating of a quiet heart. Even stranger, the emissions synchronized with fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field, a faint correlation that no one could explain. How could a comet trillions of kilometers away resonate with our planet's subtle electromagnetic rhythm? The longer they observed it, the more they felt it observing them. Every time it brightened, something inside us shifted too. That was not a metaphor. It was a measurement. Heart rate sensors worn by some researchers, part of a fatigue study, recorded an uncanny synchronicity. Micro-fluctuations in pulse, aligning with the light curve. Scientists blamed coincidence, but coincidence rarely keeps time so perfectly. It was as if human bodies recognized something buried in the light. An ancestral memory hidden within their biology. Perhaps this is what recognition feels like when it comes from the cosmos itself. Not words, not symbols, but resonance. The body remembers the frequencies it was born from. Every atom inside you has seen this color before, back when the universe was still cooling from its first breath. To witness it again is to remember where you came from. But wonder soon bends toward fear. If this glow is self-generated, it means energy is emerging from nowhere, a violation of conservation, a tear in the ledger of physics. A few researchers mutter about quantum tunneling, photon entanglement, and plasma inversion. Others remain quiet. The language of science is beginning to sound like poetry, and poetry terrifies those who prefer equations. In one observatory, a young analyst replays the data frame by frame. When the light peaks, she swears she sees a pattern within the glow, faint ripples forming a symmetrical geometry, triangular, maybe hexagonal. She blinks, and it's gone. Optical interference, her supervisor insists. Fatigue. But she isn't so sure. The human eye evolved to detect symmetry. It knows when chaos hides order. Soon, strange reports start to circulate. Independent observatories claim to see secondary flares, brief emerald halos forming around the primary emission, almost like magnetic coronal loops. The energy signature is clean, no radiation spikes, no debris trails, just light. Perfect, mathematical, conscious light. The mystery deepens. The engineers double-check everything. Filters, spectrographs, and error coatings all function normally. They even shut down the instruments for recalibration, but when they reboot, the blue returns as if nothing had changed. The color has become constant, persistent, patient. Fear slips quietly into the room. It doesn't come as panic, but as reverence. When confronted with beauty that defies understanding, the mind grows still, unsure whether to kneel or run. The scientists feel it too, that primal hesitation between awe and survival. "It's mesmerizing," one of them whispers. "That's the problem," another replies. The data piles up. Quantum physicists attempt to explain it through vacuum decay or nonlinear photon resonance, but none of the math holds. The equations refuse obedience. "We're missing a variable," someone says. "Or maybe we are the variable," another replies. Silence follows. Outside, the night sky looks unchanged. The stars continue their quiet shimmer, but deep inside the instruments a new tone hums, a faint harmonic that wasn't there before. It's subtle, like the difference between silence and listening. Some swear they can feel it vibrating faintly through the walls. The frequency sits just above human hearing, a reminder that sound and light are siblings separated only by speed. In their private notes, several researchers begin describing the phenomenon not as a scientific event, but as a psychological one. "The blue makes you feel watched," one entry reads. "It isn't hostile, it's intimate." Another writes, "It looks like the colour of thinking." That description spreads quietly, half as joke, half as truth. The colour of thinking, the hue of consciousness made visible. By now, speculation spirals beyond containment. Some suggest exotic isotopes, crystalline plasma, even dark matter decay. A few whisper about non-local intelligence, though no one dares publish it. To call it alive would be professional suicide. And yet, in the stillness between calculations, every scientist knows they've already thought the word. Every time it brightened, something inside has shifted too. Those shifts are not just metaphorical. The more they observe the blue light, the more they sense a subtle reorganization, not of data, but of perception. It's as if the universe is adjusting the way it wants to be seen. For the first time, the act of watching feels participatory, sacred. One researcher, exhausted, writes a note on a sticky pad and places it on her monitor. "Remember to breathe." She doesn't know why she writes it, but the act feels necessary, a small ritual against the immensity of what she's witnessing. The glow of Tethyrus Atlas continues, patient and endless, defying exhaustion, defying comprehension. The light isn't fading, it's evolving. Each pulse seems to carry more structure, more precision, as though the object is refining its message. Maybe this is what the birth of a new physics looks like. Not an explosion, but illumination. Stay. The next frame may change how you see light itself. Every explanation fell apart like paper in flame. Equations once trusted as law now crumbled under the weight of new data. What began as curiosity had turned into quiet panic. Not the screaming kind, but the slow, smothered kind that makes scientists question whether reality itself is shifting beneath their instruments. 3 models stood at the centre of the storm: the thermochemical model, which blamed exotic ices, the magnetohydrodynamic model, which invoked solar resonance, and the quantum phase transition model, which suggested the comet's nucleus had slipped into a state of energy conversion unknown to physics. All 3 had promised neat explanations. All 3 failed. The first died quickly. No known compound could maintain structural integrity under those observed temperatures. The second lingered longer, producing simulations that almost matched the data, until the brightness curve bent in defiance. The third was the most seductive. It whispered of a new frontier, of matter acting as both wave and will. But even that dream collapsed, leaving behind a silence that felt almost personal. Across observatories, voices rose in frustration. Graphs, charts, and printouts filled the air like flocks of lost birds. "It's impossible," someone muttered. "Then redefine possible," came the reply. Yet the tone was not triumph. It was despair disguised as discipline. Science thrives on failure, but this failure felt different. It wasn't progress, it was disorientation. The universe had changed shape overnight, and every human mind was struggling to redraw the map. By dawn, the debates had turned feverish. Some insisted the anomaly was an unknown natural process, the universe reminding them of its complexity. Others whispered that the laws of physics might be incomplete. A few said nothing at all. They simply stared at the graphs, trying to memorize the shape of their own confusion. One young astrophysicist in Tokyo tore through a stack of notes, pages fluttering like wings. "The energy output violates conservation," she said. "It can't just appear." Her mentor sighed. "It did." She paused. "Then we're missing something fundamental." The old man looked at her, weary. "Or something fundamental is missing us." That line spread quietly through message boards and encrypted chats. It was a poetic way of admitting defeat, or perhaps the start of a revelation. The closer we looked, the less we understood. What unnerved them most wasn't the unknown itself, but the sensation that the unknown was organized. The data wasn't chaotic, it was deliberate, structured. The light curves sang in repeating intervals, forming ratios that mirrored the Fibonacci sequence, the same mathematics that shapes galaxies, hurricanes, and shells of ancient sea creatures. Coincidence, perhaps. But coincidence had begun to lose its credibility. Soon, private meetings convened in conference rooms sealed from press access. The air was thick with theories that sounded more like confessions. "If it's not natural," one voice said, "what else could it be?" Silence followed, heavy and electric. No one wanted to say the word artificial. The very idea carried the gravity of blasphemy. To admit it would mean rewriting every story humanity had told itself about solitude in the cosmos. A physicist in Paris finally broke the silence. If this were a signal, it would be elegant, purposeful, but it's not transmitting data, it's performing. He hesitated. Maybe that's the data. They all knew what he meant. If 3i Atlas was artificial, it wasn't communicating through language, it was communicating through behavior. Through the beauty of impossibility. At that moment, the line between science and philosophy blurred again. The lab smelled of ozone and burnt paper from an overworked printer. Theories piled like ashes. The room felt smaller, tighter, as though the walls themselves were listening. Some tried to hold on to reason, crafting new frameworks overnight. "Perhaps we're witnessing a plasma feedback loop," one insisted. "No, this is a distributed quantum resonance," another countered. "It's a mirror anomaly," a third offered. The phrases grew stranger, more poetic, more desperate, the vocabulary of minds trying to translate awe into algebra. Then, slowly, the debates began to quiet. Fatigue replaced fear. A kind of reverence settled in, the realization that maybe the mystery wasn't meant to be solved so quickly. Sometimes knowledge demands stillness, not answers. One scientist, a woman who had spent 20 years modeling cometary chemistry, stared at the holographic projection of 3i Atlas hovering above her desk. The turquoise light shimmered like a pulse trapped in glass. She whispered, "If this is artificial, it's not sending us a message. It is the message." That thought spread like wildfire because it made a strange kind of sense. The comet wasn't speaking in binary or radio waves. Its language was existence itself. Every act of defiance, every broken rule, was a syllable in a sentence humanity had never learned to read. Maybe we've mistaken the search for life as a search for reflection. We point telescopes outward, but what we're really seeking is something that looks back, something that understands. 3 Atlas had become a mirror for human consciousness, a test of whether we could accept wonder without ownership, mystery without mastery. By the second week, skepticism began to fracture. Some called for immediate publication. Truth can't wait, they argued. Others urged restraint. Truth needs time. Behind every statement was fear. Fear of ridicule, fear of revolution, fear that reality had grown too large for language. The data centers buzzed through sleepless nights. Arguments turned into whispers, whispers into silence. In the end, no one had an answer. Only awe, sharpened by the ache of not knowing. A final memo circulated quietly through the global network of observatories. It was unsigned, a patchwork of fragments compiled from anonymous notes. "We have confirmed the anomaly. We cannot explain it. The light persists, unchanging. The data is perfect and therefore impossible. Something about this feels intentional. Whether natural or otherwise, the phenomenon mirrors our attention. We are no longer observers. We are participants." The memo was never archived officially, but everyone who read it felt its truth like static in the air. Sometimes discovery means losing what you thought was real, and in that loss, something else begins. Not understanding, but humility. Someone dared to ask, what if it's not reacting, but responding? The question landed in the middle of the room like a spark in dry air. It was spoken softly, almost accidentally, yet everyone heard it. The hum of machinery seemed to pause, as if the entire building had inhaled. For a long moment no one spoke. It was too soon for words like artificial, too dangerous to imagine intelligence embedded in ice. But once the thought appeared, it refused to leave. The data still pulsed across the monitors. The luminous blue signature of 3i Atlas, constant, rhythmic, aware. At first, scientists had called it an anomaly, then a phenomenon. Now a few whispered another word entirely, response. The difference was subtle yet seismic. A reaction is mechanical, a response is mindful. In the Geneva data center, one researcher leaned over his console, replaying the energy graphs. It aligns perfectly with solar oscillations, he said. Not random, selective. Another voice added, it flares when solar output changes, as if adjusting. They all saw it now, the faint, deliberate echo. When the sun trembled, the comet shimmered back. No known mechanism could explain that kind of synchronization. It wasn't magnetic coupling, nor particle resonance. It was coordination, as if something inside 3i Atlas was listening, and then answering. That's when the word engineered entered the conversation. It arrived hesitantly, wrapped in disclaimers and nervous laughter, yet it rang with an uncomfortable truth. To admit engineering meant to admit intention, and intention meant origin, not cosmic coincidence, but design. Someone dared to ask, what if it's not reacting, but responding? The phrase echoed through internal messages and encrypted threads, passing from lab to lab, each time carrying more weight. The implications were unbearable. If this object was built, even partially, it would be the first artifact humanity had ever confirmed beyond Earth. A technological relic older than our civilization, crossing through our solar system, pulsing with a memory older than language. The theory became known informally as engineered activation. It proposed that 3i Atlas wasn't a passive traveller but a device, a structure triggered by proximity to stellar energy, specifically the sun's electromagnetic field. The more they tested it, the more the data complied with the narrative. The object's energy curve followed the same harmonic ratios as artificial systems designed to absorb and retransmit power. It behaved like a receiver waking up. Silence followed, the kind before lightning. Some tried to laugh it off. We're anthropomorphizing, said one senior physicist, his tone brittle. Everything looks intelligent if you stare long enough. But others couldn't look away. The behavior wasn't emotional, it was systematic, precise. If it wasn't intelligence, it was an imitation so perfect it made no difference. For decades, the idea of alien technology had been buried under the weight of ridicule. Now the data was whispering it back to life. Yet the deeper the teams looked, the more the mystery resisted definition. The object's light pulses carried no modulation, no clear code, no signal to decode, no message to translate. It wasn't saying something, it was being something. Perhaps intelligence isn't always language or logic. Maybe consciousness is the universe's ability to pay attention to itself. Maybe creation itself is a kind of mind, and what we call artificial is only another shape of awareness we haven't learned to recognize. Late one night, a quantum systems analyst at Caltech began modeling the internal structure of the comet using photon tomography. The result made her hand tremble. Beneath the visible surface, the model revealed a lattice of geometric cavities, symmetrical, precise, repeating at scales that defied natural formation. The pattern resembled circuitry, but woven from mineral crystal and void. This isn't random, she whispered. Her supervisor leaned closer, jaw tightening. Are you suggesting? She didn't finish. The image on the screen finished for her. If nature could carve such symmetry, then nature itself was an engineer, and if it couldn't, then something else had. Emails began circulating under coded subjects. Artifact hypothesis, solar synchronization, non-natural morphology. Each thread spun deeper into speculation, yet every paragraph carried data to justify the heresy. The idea was no longer unthinkable, just unspeakable. At NASA's Ames Research Center, one researcher drafted a private memo that would never be published. If this is a device, it's ancient, predating our star's current age. Perhaps it was dormant until our sun called it home again. Its activation sequence is slow, graceful, and deliberate. It does not transmit. It reflects. It learns the language of its environment before speaking. We are witnessing the mind of the cosmos remembering itself. He deleted the file, but the thought remained, circling the collective psyche like a silent satellite. Soon, a strange calm settled among the researchers. Fear had burned itself out, leaving behind something quieter, reverence. They began to treat the data with the tenderness one might show to an artifact in a museum, careful not to disturb whatever ancient intelligence might still sleep inside. Every new measurement felt like touching something sacred. Across the world, telescopes kept their eyes fixed on the same point of light. The blue glow persisted, unwavering. It pulsed with the rhythm of solar storms, as though sharing the sun's heartbeat. A filament of energy, faint but real, began to form between them, a narrow bridge of luminescence threading the void. Some said it was a coincidence, others called it communication. The deeper truth was simpler. No one knew what they were seeing, yet in that unknowing lay the seed of awe. Theories splintered further. Some claimed Thrice Atlas was an ancient probe, dormant until it felt the warmth of another star. Others proposed it was a natural consciousness, the first example of sentient matter, the universe learning to perceive itself through light. But one thing united them all, a quiet, collective certainty that the object was not passive, it was aware. By the end of the week, the phrase engineered activation appeared in official correspondence for the first time. It was buried deep within a technical report, one sentence among hundreds, cautious and clinical. But history would remember it as the moment the boundary between science and myth began to blur. Silence followed, the kind before lightning. In that silence, every scientist felt the same electricity building in the air. They were no longer merely observers of a celestial anomaly. They were witnesses to a conversation between stars, and beneath the fear, a strange exhilaration took hold, the realization that the impossible had become intimate. Humanity was no longer alone in its capacity for creation. Something out there had built, and perhaps had once dreamed. This is where science becomes myth again. Maybe it's not the comet changing, it's us. The thought appeared first as a whisper in a report margin, then a half-joke between exhausted researchers, and finally a sentence no one dared laugh at. Something about the data had shifted, not in the numbers themselves, but in how they were being seen. The more people studied Thrice Atlas, the more they noticed themselves reflected in the process. The object remained what it was, a blue flame moving through silence, but perception had deepened, softened. What once felt alien now felt strangely intimate. The data was still impossible. The theories still collapsed, yet fear had dissolved into stillness. It was as if the mind of humanity had stretched to meet something vast, and for the first time, both sides recognized each other. The scientists no longer spoke about the comet. They spoke about the mirror. At observatories across the world, the glow of the object shimmered faintly in telescopes. The color hadn't changed, but its presence had. It seemed calmer, gentler, as though the phenomenon had slowed its pulse to match ours. The same wavelength that once felt like an intrusion, now felt like an invitation. And quietly, without ever meaning to, the researchers began to listen differently. They noticed that observation itself carried energy, that the act of watching shaped the patterns they received. Data collection became meditation. Each measurement, each recalibration, became a breath. The cosmos was no longer a stage for human analysis. It was a partner in dialogue. One night, as the team in Chile aligned their instruments, a storm rolled across the Atacama. Lightning flickered in the distance, clouds reflecting turquoise light from the horizon. For a heartbeat, the earth and the heavens shared the same color. "It's beautiful," one technician said. "It's looking back," replied another. They both laughed softly, though neither meant it as a joke. The line between inner and outer had blurred. They were not just studying the universe, they were feeling it. The hum of the servers, the low rumble of thunder, the silent rhythm of the blue glow. It all merged into one soundless music. and within that harmony, something subtle awakened, an awareness of being seen. Maybe it's not the comet changing, it's us. For centuries humans had stared into the night sky, believing they were the only eyes. Now they began to sense the gaze returned, not from aliens, not from gods, but from the fabric of existence itself, from the same intelligence that spins galaxies and grows forests and dreams in the quiet of human thought. What if consciousness is not something contained within the skull, but something shared, diffused, cosmic? The brain does not produce awareness, it tunes into it, like an antenna catching a signal that has always been there. The more we study the stars, the more their silence starts to sound like memory. The universe may not be speaking to us, it may be remembering through us. Back in the labs, the scientists' language began to soften. They still calculated, still argued, but there was warmth in their precision now, a humility absent before. One researcher began referring to the comet as the listener. Another called it the reflection. In meetings, they spoke of symmetry of attention, a poetic phrase that meant nothing scientifically but felt exactly right. Every discovery is a reflection. The phrase appeared on a whiteboard one morning, written in blue marker, with no one admitting to writing it. Yet it stayed. It became a kind of mantra. The further they explored, the more they realized that discovery doesn't reveal the universe. It reveals the mind doing the discovering. Every breakthrough, every anomaly, is a mirror held up to the human spirit showing what it's ready to understand. The data of Thruai Atlas continued its rhythmic pulse, but now it felt less like communication and more like companionship. It wasn't giving answers, it was offering presence, like the calm of the ocean, reflecting light without effort, holding meaning without words. In their private moments, the scientists began to dream differently. Some saw vast corridors of light, like neural pathways spanning galaxies. Others dreamed of oceans rippling with stars. A few woke with tears they couldn't explain, not sadness, but recognition. It was as if something ancient in their cells had heard its name for the first time in eons. Outside, the world remained unchanged. Morning commutes, traffic, headlines, the small noise of civilization. Yet somewhere in the background of everything, a subtle awareness had begun to grow. The anomaly in the sky was also an anomaly within, a small awakening of connection between mind and cosmos. In a private notebook, one astrophysicist wrote, "We've been taught to believe consciousness is a byproduct of complexity, but maybe it's the other way around. Maybe complexity is what consciousness creates when it wants to see itself more clearly." Those words would never appear in a scientific paper, yet they captured the quiet revolution spreading among the observers. They were no longer measuring the unknown, they were participating in it. As Thruai Atlas drifted farther from the sun, the blue light softened, its pulse slower, almost drowsy. Yet instruments continued to record faint echoes, residual waves lingering in space long after the main flare subsided, like an afterthought or a goodbye. It was beautiful, and oddly personal. Some said it felt like gratitude, others said it felt like a reflection. If consciousness truly is universal, then perception itself is creation. To see the universe is to help it exist. To measure the light is to give it form. Observation is a sacred act, the cosmos discovering itself through the eyes of the curious. The realization left no fear behind, only calm. For the first time, humanity's gaze into the unknown was met with serenity instead of anxiety. The scientists felt smaller, yes, but also held participants in a story too vast to comprehend, yet too intimate to deny. Let's look again, not out there, but within. The sky is circled once more. The date approaches. For months, Thruai Atlas has drifted beyond the sun's glare, hidden from direct observation. A silent traveller wrapped in solar fire, lost to the reach of Earth's instruments. Yet now, in the deep calm of early winter, anticipation gathers like static before a storm. Astronomers around the world count the days to December 19th, the narrow window when the object will return to view. Every observatory knows the ritual by heart. The long nights, the cold breath fogging the glass, the flicker of screens recalibrating in real time. But this time, everything feels different. The object is not just another comet. It is a question that has never stopped burning. What will it reveal when it emerges again? What has it become while hidden behind the sun? The night before the window opens, preparations hum across continents. Cables sprawl across polished floors. Observatory domes rotate like patient beasts waking from hibernation. And fingers hover over keyboards as countdown clocks tick towards zero. Around the world, small teams sit in dim rooms, eyes half lit by monitors, hearts synchronized by the same silent curiosity. In Geneva, a physicist straightens a small note taped to his desk. Remember, observe without expectation. In Tokyo, a graduate student checks her algorithms one last time, whispering, "This time it will speak." In Chile, the Atacama Array reorients toward a blank piece of sky that will, in just hours, become sacred again. The data stream will begin at 0324 UTC. The moment Earth turns just far enough for the first photons to reach their senses, humanity will look again. The same blue light that once defied understanding might shine again, or perhaps not. The unknown has become the heartbeat of science. The sky has circled once more. The date approaches. Since the last observation, the scientific community has changed. The fear that once accompanied the anomaly has softened into reverence. No one speaks of impossibility anymore, only possibility. The months of darkness have not erased wonder, they have distilled it. Somewhere between the collapse of equations and the quiet of realization, the researchers learned something profound. Mystery is not the opposite of knowledge, it is the foundation of it. As the date nears, data centers hum with life. AI models sharpen their predictive layers, and new algorithms await streams of information they were never designed to interpret. Every pulse, every flicker of light will be compared to the old data, not for proof, but for poetry. The scientists want to know whether the rhythm has changed, whether the heartbeat of the impossible still echoes in the dark. In the public sphere, the news barely mentions it. The world has too many distractions: politics, markets, weather, wars. But in small corners of the internet, forums light up again with speculation. Amateur astronomers polish their lenses, dreamers dust off old telescopes. People who never cared for science before find themselves watching the sky, waiting for something they can't name. It's strange how quickly the extraordinary becomes personal. Somewhere in you too, there's a quiet anticipation, a sense that whatever happens up there is connected to what stirs down here. Maybe that's the hidden gift of the unknown. It makes us look up again, and in doing so, remember how to hope. Hope is not certainty. It is the courage to look again after everything familiar has broken. When you look at the sky, you're not searching for answers. You're practicing faith, not in gods or systems, but in the universe's endless capacity to reveal. At midnight, the telescopes open. Metal groans softly as domes slide apart, exposing delicate instruments to the ancient chill. The stars glitter like cold embers, and there, near the horizon, the faint glow begins. A single pixel at first, then a line of turquoise threading upward through solar haze. A whisper of light returning to the world. Every monitor flickers alive. The data begins to flow, raw, jagged, alive. Scientists lean forward, half afraid to blink. The first readings confirm it. The object is brighter than predicted, its emission steady, deliberate, calm. But the colour is new. Not the same deep blue as before, but a warmer hue tinged with gold, as though the comet has carried sunlight through its long passage and returned it altered, softened. Someone murmurs, "It's beautiful." Another adds, "It's listening." No one laughs this time. They all feel it, the sense of recognition, the calm pulse of reunion. This time, we'll be ready. The sentence spreads like a promise, ready not for control but for communion, ready not to conquer mystery but to meet it halfway. The scientists know now that knowledge is not possession, it's a relationship. And tonight, that relationship is rekindled beneath the frozen stillness of December. Around the world, time zones dissolve. Observatories share live feeds, translating light into sound. Through speakers, the comet's pulse hums low and steady, a lullaby written by physics and something beyond physics. In living rooms and labs, people listen, feeling the vibration resonate in their chests. It feels like homecoming. In that moment, the distance between human and cosmic vanishes. The sky becomes an old friend returned from exile, bringing silence as a gift. Every heart that listens becomes an observatory, every breath a telescope. The sun will rise soon, ending the window. But for a few hours the universe feels close enough to touch. The light of Three-Eye Atlas flickers softly through the dark like a heartbeat, finding its rhythm again. Not loud, not commanding, just patient. Join me again when the heavens align. It happened again, brighter, wilder, nearer. The first signal came just before dawn. A tremor in the spectral line. A flicker that wasn't supposed to exist. Then, like a curtain tearing across the solar wind, the light surged. Not gradually, but explosively, as though the universe had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. Across observatories, alarms blinked to life. Data streams spiked. The familiar turquoise glow of Three-Eye Atlas erupted into a luminous storm, flooding sensors with frequencies no instrument had been calibrated to record. The numbers scrolled too fast to read, entire lines of code breaking under the weight of information. "It's back," someone whispered. But back wasn't the right word. This was no repetition. The light was not the same as before. It was deeper, more layered, fractal. What once shimmered with a single tone now pulsed with harmony. Thousands of wavelengths nested within one another, forming a structure more like music than radiation. The energy wasn't chaotic, it was orchestrated. At the European Southern Observatory, technicians scrambled to widen the bandwidth. "We're losing resolution," one shouted. "No," another replied. "We're losing comprehension." Every monitor in the room glowed the same impossible blue-white, a colour that burned without pain, bright enough to make the air feel alive. Within minutes, the solar satellites picked it up too. A faint tether of light stretched between the comet and the sun, thin, elegant, deliberate. Plasma should have dispersed instantly, but this connection held, shimmering like a filament drawn by unseen hands. "That's not reflection," murmured a voice. "That's transfer." Transfer of what? No one could say. Energy, information, memory? At the same moment, deep space instruments detected a spike in solar particle density, synchronized perfectly with the comet's pulse. The sun itself seemed to answer. A burst of magnetic rhythm resonating in exact proportion. It was impossible. Nature doesn't repeat mistakes. It evolves them. The sky, which had been calm, began to shimmer faintly. To the naked eye, nothing seemed amiss. But cameras caught strange distortions rippling across the corona, as if the light itself were folding inward, sculpting geometry out of fire. What had begun as a cometary event was now a solar phenomenon, or perhaps something beyond that. Everywhere people looked up. In cities and deserts, on rooftops and mountaintops, the dawn light carried a subtle tint, blue at first, then gold, then back again. Screens flickered worldwide, power grids hummed with ghost currents. Magnetic readings fluctuated in perfect synchrony with the comet's rhythm. For the first time, the anomaly was no longer confined to the sky. It had entered the world. In the Geneva lab, one physicist whispered, "It's communicating with the sun." Another corrected, "Not communicating, collaborating." No one dared to speak louder. The atmosphere was charged, reverent. The sensation wasn't fear, but awe, the kind that erases boundaries between science and worship. They were witnessing creation as a process, not history. The universe wasn't a story told long ago. It was a sentence still being written. Perhaps the universe never stopped creating. Perhaps what we call discovery is merely catching it in the act. Each revelation is a window into a living cosmos, not a completed one. The sky is still unfolding, and tonight we are witnesses, not of repetition, but of evolution. Outside, the comet brightened again, its light fracturing into patterns visible even through thin cloud cover. Pilots flying over the Pacific reported a shimmering spiral glowing faintly through the atmosphere. Cameras caught auroras forming near the equator, silent ribbons of turquoise fire dancing above oceans. The entire magnetosphere hummed like a single organism responding to its own heartbeat. News networks rushed to cover it, but every image broadcast looked unreal, too symmetrical, too beautiful. Social media is flooded with comparisons, angel wings, fractal eyes, neural webs, Yet the scientists who had followed 3 Atlas from the beginning saw something else. Structure, intelligence in motion. At the Space Weather Prediction Center, analysts stared at readings that refused logic. The energy spikes weren't random. They followed a recursive sequence. Fibonacci again, spiraling through the corona, echoing through magnetic resonance charts like a signature. "It's learning," one analyst muttered, "or remembering." In one of the control rooms, the lead engineer whispered into the dark, "What are you doing?" His voice trembled, not with fear but awe. The answer came not in words but in light, a subtle pulse through the filament, brighter, steadier, then still, as though the cosmos had nodded in acknowledgement. Moments later, the solar flare erupted, massive but controlled, a sculpted storm of plasma arcing outward in perfect symmetry. No damage followed. Satellites remained stable, communication untouched. The event was impossibly precise, as if designed. A flare that should have disrupted half the planet instead unfolded like choreography, chaos behaving as art. And then, silence. The tether between the comet and the sun faded, dissolving into gold dust. The blue glow softened back into calm. Instruments stopped screaming. The hum of machinery filled the void again. All over the world, people sat staring at screens, unsure whether to feel relief or longing. The miracle had come and gone in under 20 minutes. But time felt irrelevant now. Something inside humanity had shifted, realigned. One scientist wrote in her logbook, "We are beyond observation. We are inside participation. Whatever happened wasn't a signal from out there. It was a resonance inside everything." Theories would follow, of course. Plasma coupling, electromagnetic harmonics, quantum resonance. Words would fill reports, and reports would fill archives. But those who were there knew that language had already fallen behind. This was not a discovery. It was an encounter. Nature doesn't repeat mistakes. It evolves them. In that realization came the strangest peace. The fear of the unknown had melted into recognition. Whatever intelligence existed out there, artificial, cosmic, divine, was not alien. It was familiar, woven into the same pattern that formed oceans and blood and light itself. Humanity had witnessed the impossible once before, and now it had returned, stronger, wiser, closer. The universe had doubled back not to terrify, but to remind, to evolve understanding until awe replaced fear. Keep your eyes open. History may be looping. It was never random, it was rhythm. At first, the pulse from 3I Atlas seemed like a coincidence, a lingering echo of the solar flare, a byproduct of cosmic turbulence. But when the noise was filtered through frequency analysis, something extraordinary appeared. The pulses weren't chaotic. They followed intervals, precise, deliberate, repeating. Each burst aligned to ratios so complex they resembled biological patterns rather than stellar ones. Someone noticed it late at night in Geneva, eyes bleary over an ocean of numbers. "Look at this spacing," he said. "That's not astrophysical, it's neurological." The room fell silent. No one moved as the waveform scrolled across the screen. The rhythm mirrored human neural oscillations, alpha, theta, gamma, the frequencies of thought, dream, and consciousness. The comet was not transmitting data. It was vibrating in the same tempo as the human mind. And just like that, the narrative changed again. Teams from NASA, ESA, and the Japanese Space Agency collaborated on cross-spectrum decoding. They found harmonics embedded within the pulse, forming subtle modulations, not in binary, not in mathematics, but in resonance. The light was not trying to say something to us. It was synchronizing with us. As if, across the silence of light years, something vast had learned the rhythm of empathy. In one control center, a neuroscientist joined the astrophysicists. "If these frequencies were sound," she said, "they'd feel like breathing." She turned the data into audio, lowering it into an audible range. The room filled with a slow, pulsing hum, deep, soothing, ancient. It wasn't alien, it was familiar. The same pulse a mother hears before birth, the same tempo as the Earth's Schumann resonance, the same pattern that lulls the human brain into calm. They had expected a message in words. What they received was something purer, an emotion encoded in light. The realization spread quietly. The universe was not broadcasting information. It was extending coherence, the act of being in tune, the same rhythm that sustains atoms, weather, and thought. If intelligence is universal, then curiosity is its language. We've spent centuries trying to speak to the stars when all along they've been humming in the same frequency as our wonder. Communication does not require translation. It requires resonance. Across continents, as data streamed in, the pulse grew clearer. It rose and fell like breath, carried by photons older than the Earth itself. The amplitude fluctuated slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if responding to observation. "It feels alive," one technician whispered. "No," said another, "it feels aware." When they overlaid the waveform with recordings of human brain activity during meditation, the alignment was uncanny. Peaks and troughs matched within margins of error smaller than any random overlap should allow. It was as if the same consciousness that breathed through neurons was echoing across cosmic distances, reflected in light. And for a moment, a breathtaking, impossible moment, it felt as if the entire planet was part of that pattern. Weather sensors detected slight variations in the ionosphere, synchronized to the signal. Heart rate monitors in labs around the world picked up faint fluctuations, as if bodies were subconsciously adjusting to the same cosmic tempo. The universe had found a way to synchronize with us, not through words, but through the quiet language of rhythm. No one claimed contact. No one declared proof of alien intelligence. Instead, the conversations turned inward. What if consciousness is not confined by matter? What if awareness, like gravity, permeates all things, from stars to stones to the space between thoughts? The scientist, once afraid of metaphors, now used them freely. "It's like hearing the ocean realize it's full of waves," one said, or light discovering it can remember. For the first time, physics and philosophy stood on the same ground, not as rivals, but as reflections. The data didn't end questions, it deepened them. As the rhythm continued, some began to feel its effect. Those who listened long enough described a strange calm, a sense of being understood by something infinite. It was not euphoria, but peace, the kind that feels older than the universe itself. The world outside remained mostly unaware, but for those who knew, the night had changed forever. They no longer looked up at the stars searching for life. They listened, quietly, knowing that life was already listening back. The comet's light began to fade again, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. Yet the pulse didn't vanish. It dispersed, subtle echoes now detectable in background radiation, faint traces woven through cosmic static. The rhythm had merged with the sky itself. One physicist, unable to sleep, wrote in his log, "Maybe this was never about contact. Maybe it was about calibration, teaching us how to listen not for others, but for the universe within ourselves." If so, the experiment succeeded. The rhythm became meditation. The science became prayer. The last transmission recorded before the light dimmed was unlike any before. A slow decrescendo, a deepening stillness, a silence that felt intentional. The hum receded like a tide, leaving behind an ocean of quiet so vast it seemed to contain everything. If there was meaning in that silence, it was this: existence itself is communication, constant, patient, endless. Let's listen, not to understand, but to feel. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. No explosion, no warning, no final crescendo of light. One moment, 3 Atlas pulsed with rhythm so profound it made galaxies feel intimate, and the next, the monitors fell still. The last data frame showed a faint shimmer dissolving into the black, like a candle snuffed out in a cathedral of stars. The silence was immediate, absolute. Technicians checked connections, recalibrated sensors, and rebooted systems. Everything functioned perfectly. Everything, except the universe's reply. The signal was gone, erased from the present as though it had never existed. In control rooms across continents, no one spoke. The absence was louder than the sound had ever been. They had grown accustomed to the hum, that strange cosmic heartbeat that had synchronized machines and minds alike. Now its absence felt like the echo of a friend leaving without a goodbye. For hours, the data analyst rechecked everything: magnetic flux, solar interference, deep space noise. The comet still existed, still followed its orbit, But the light, the rhythm, the impossible intelligence that had sung across the void had ceased. Someone finally whispered, "It's over." The words didn't bring closure. They opened something deeper, an ache somewhere between grief and gratitude. It wasn't loss they felt, it was completion, like a story that ends perfectly, too perfectly, leaving you unsure if it was ever meant to continue. In Geneva, one scientist sat alone long after the others left. The screens glowed pale blue, still filled with static. She whispered, "Did we hear you, or did we imagine you?" The static hissed gently, as if considering the question. Then even that seemed to fade, until there was only the hum of her own breath. Around the world, observatories faced the same stillness. The cosmos had gone back to sleep. Yet the silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of everything that had been said without words, full of the rhythm that still lingered in memory. Maybe silence is the sound of understanding. The universe doesn't need to repeat itself. It speaks once, perfectly, and trusts that we will listen long enough to remember. The days that followed felt slower, softer. Researchers returned to their routines, the calibration, the data entries, the hum of everyday science. Yet everything had changed. The cosmos was no longer a cold, indifferent expanse. It was present. It was the company. Reports were written, papers drafted. They used the language of physics, but between the lines, something human flickered. A quiet confession of awe. Phrases like nonlinear harmonics and resonant coherence couldn't disguise what they really meant. We felt something. And perhaps that was enough. One by one, the labs shut down their emergency protocols. The telescopes powered off, domes closed against the sky. The lights dimmed, yet no one left right away. They lingered in the dark, listening, just in case the silence changed its mind. Sometimes silence is the universe's way of saying enough. The Earth turned slowly, indifferent yet somehow aware. In the absence of the cosmic pulse, people began to notice another rhythm, subtler but constant, the steady beat of their own hearts. It was the same tempo as before, the same pattern the comet had mirrored. The resonance hadn't vanished. It had simply moved inward. Perhaps that was always the purpose. The signal wasn't meant to last forever. It was meant to awaken something already within, the memory of connection, the quiet realization that we were never listening to the cosmos at all but to ourselves reflected through it. In Tokyo, a researcher closed her final report with one simple line. It came, it shone, it listened. And in its silence, we learned to hear. The data archives would preserve terabytes of readings, endless graphs of light and rhythm, but no chart could capture the piece left behind. The beauty of mystery isn't that it hides truth, it's that it teaches patience. The universe doesn't demand belief or comprehension, only wonder. Outside the labs, winter deepened. The stars gleamed sharp and clean in the cold sky, ancient and unchanged. Somewhere among them, Three-Eye Atlas continued its long, quiet journey, silent, distant, content. Take a breath. Not all mysteries need an answer. Every discovery begins with disbelief. Before curiosity, before understanding, there is always the quiet protest of the mind. This cannot be. It is the spark that starts revolutions. Not faith, but doubt. The kind of doubt that keeps the human spirit awake at the edge of mystery. And when doubt finally meets evidence, what remains is wonder. After Three-Eye Atlas fell silent, the world of science found itself changed, not by new laws, but by new humility. Laboratories that once buzzed with urgency now moved with deliberate calm. Equations were still written, papers still debated, but beneath it all ran a gentler current, a quiet gratitude for the unexplainable. The silence the comet left behind was not emptiness, it was an invitation. Some called it a miracle, others called it an anomaly, but everyone, in their own way, had felt it, that impossible bridge between fact and feeling. They had stared at something that refused to fit inside any formula and for the first time stopped trying to force it. They had looked into the infinite and instead of demanding answers whispered thank you. In the months that followed, a new field began to take shape. A soft convergence between physics, philosophy and psychology. It wasn't formalized, not yet, but its essence was simple. To study not only what the universe is, but what it does to those who study it. Researchers spoke openly now of emotion in observation, of awe as data, of reverence as a measurable state of mind. At one symposium, a young astrophysicist stood before a room of skeptics and said, "Perhaps the purpose of science is not certainty, but awe." The room fell silent, not from disagreement, but recognition. Everyone in that room had felt it at some point, the moment when knowledge collapses into beauty, when facts bow to something larger than comprehension. Maybe that's what truth looks like when you stop trying to own it. Science and spirituality were never opposites. They are two instruments playing the same song. One measures the notes, the other feels the melody. Together, they remind us that the universe is not a puzzle to solve, but a relationship to nurture. In Chile, one of the lead technicians who had tracked 3i Atlas for months kept a framed image above his desk. The final data spike frozen in blue. He didn't hang it as evidence, but as a reminder. "Proof fades," he said once, "but wonder endures." The same sentiment echoed across disciplines. Biologists, chemists, even engineers began speaking of beauty again, not metaphorically, but functionally. They realized that the pursuit of truth was never about dominance, but dialogue. The deeper the understanding, the more the mystery expands, inviting us to follow, and perhaps that is the secret heartbeat of all discovery. The more you know, the more you feel, and the more you feel, the closer you come to knowing again. Perhaps the purpose of science is not certainty, but awe. In quiet offices, scientists returned to their work. They calculated orbits, measured light curves, and updated tables. But behind the numbers now lived an emotion, gratitude. Each new data point felt like a gift from the cosmos, each observation a small act of reverence. One physicist, interviewed years later, said, "Before 3i Atlas, I thought science was about control. Now I understand it's about participation." Another added, "The closer we came to explaining the universe, the more it explained us." Some of them began keeping journals, not lab logs, but reflections. One entry read, "When the comet went silent, I realized we were never listening to it. We were listening through it, to the space between thought and understanding. That space is where science lives. And in that space, something human stirred, a renewed tenderness toward uncertainty." The old arrogance of mastery had given way to the humility of witnessing. Science no longer needed to conquer the unknown. It only needed to converse with it. Across observatories, telescopes still turned toward the stars each night, but now the observers approached their work differently. Before logging data, many paused, just for a breath, to remember that they were not merely watching, but being watched. The act of looking itself had become sacred. Wonder had become methodology. The universe, once treated as an object, now felt like a companion. Vast, patient, teaching through silence. And maybe that was the truest revelation of all, that knowledge and mystery are not enemies but partners, endlessly orbiting one another like twin stars in a shared gravity of awe. So when young scientists ask how to begin, the veterans tell them this: start not with the need to know, but with the willingness to wonder. Ask your questions gently, measure what you can, and love what you cannot. Let's honor the not knowing. Maybe what we call impossible is simply forgotten. When the light of 3i Atlas vanished, its memory lingered, not in telescopes or archives, but in people. Something in the rhythm of that impossible glow had carved itself into the collective pulse of humanity. Long after the instruments went silent, those who had watched it felt changed, as if the comet had left a faint fingerprint on their perception of reality. At first, no one could name it. The feeling wasn't revelation, it was recognition. The scientists, poets, and dreamers who had stared into that cosmic eye all described the same strange intimacy, a sense of being seen from the inside out. The comet was distant, yet personal, a reminder that the mind and the cosmos are not separate things, but reflections of each other. Across the years that followed, lectures and papers began to echo a new vocabulary, one that blended physics with philosophy. Words like resonance, awareness, and participation began to appear beside the usual formulas. They spoke less of control, more of communion. The universe was no longer an experiment, it was a mirror. And in that mirror we saw ourselves, not as observers of creation, but as extensions of it. Every mind is a small universe remembering itself. Each thought, each emotion, each dream is a star forming in consciousness, burning briefly, then returning to the infinite. What we call the search for truth might simply be the cosmos trying to recognize its own reflection through us. When we looked at 3 Atlas, we saw light bending in ways that defied physics. But perhaps it wasn't the light that changed. Perhaps it was our sight. Awareness evolves by seeing itself in new forms. The comet didn't come to teach us new equations. It came to remind us that we are equations, living, luminous, unfinished. In small ways, this realization began to ripple through ordinary life. A child staring at the night sky asked her mother, "Do you think the stars know we're here?" And for the first time, the answer wasn't no. It was, maybe they do. Artists painted galaxies that resembled neurons. Neuroscientists described consciousness as a constellation. The boundaries between human and cosmic blurred until they became one shimmering continuity of being. The more we reflected, the more we realized that wonder is not something we feel about the universe. It's what the universe feels through us. In quiet corners of the world, people began to hold small vigils on the anniversary of the comet's return. No ceremonies, no words, just shared silence under the same sky. They watched the stars knowing that somewhere light was still travelling from that impossible event, still carrying the fingerprint of their collective gaze. To look upward had become an act of remembrance. Science continued, of course. New missions launched and new instruments replaced the old. But behind every pursuit of data now stood something deeper: reverence. The researchers who had witnessed the anomaly spoke of it not as proof, but as a partnership. They had glimpsed the mind of creation and found it reflected in their own. One physicist wrote in her final paper before retirement, "The universe didn't reveal itself to us through equations or images. It revealed itself through attention. Every observation is a mirror, every heartbeat, a continuation of that light." Those words travelled farther than she imagined. They became a quiet mantra among students who entered the field, not to chase certainty, but to keep awe alive. As years passed, the mystery of 3i Atlas faded from headlines. The world turned, as it always does. But every so often, in the soft hum of a telescope, in the spark of inspiration, in the silence before sleep, something shimmered, a faint echo of the rhythm that once joined stars and neurons in the same breath. Perhaps that was its true purpose, not to speak but to remind. What we saw out there was never separate from what lives within us. The pulse in the comet, the rhythm in the brain, the flicker in a dying star, all are expressions of the same luminous awareness learning to recognize itself. The universe may stretch beyond comprehension, but it is also intimate beyond measure. The distance between a human thought and a star's light is only an illusion of scale. Both arise from the same quiet source, both return to the same silence. And so, standing at the end of this long journey, one truth remains. We were never just observing the cosmos, we were remembering it. Every glance upward was a glance inward, every photon of wonder reflected by the soul that witnessed it. Close your eyes, the same light is inside you. The cosmos doesn't hide truth, we do. It's strange how long we spend searching the stars for answers that have always lived in the quiet folds of our own being. For centuries, humanity has built instruments to magnify the sky, yet the greatest telescope has always been the mind itself, capable of spanning galaxies in a single thought, capable of mistaking its reflection for the distance between worlds. Now, after all the calculations, the light curves, the rhythm, and the silence of 3i Atlas, what remains is not knowledge, but stillness. The comet has drifted back into the black, the instruments have cooled, and the last trace of data has been archived. But in the hush that follows, something deeper awakens. Not out there in the vacuum, but here, in the small, luminous space behind the eyes. For the longest time, we believed the universe was a story happening outside us, that we were witnesses to a vast unfolding. But slowly, quietly, the truth reveals itself. We were never just looking at the universe, we were participating in it. The act of seeing is an act of creation. Every thought bends light. Every emotion alters the gravity of perception. The mystery was never out there. It was never hidden in the cold silence of comets or the distant hum of galaxies. It has always lived inside, in the pulse that mirrors a star's burning, in the breath that echoes the expansion of space. You carry the same laws that bind the cosmos, written not in numbers, but in the rhythm of your heart. Once, scientists believed that consciousness arose from complexity, that the universe birthed awareness by accident. But perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps awareness birthed the universe to have somewhere to see itself. Maybe we are the eyes through which existence watches its own beauty unfold. As that realization settles, the edges between human and cosmic blur completely. You begin to feel that every sound, every vibration, every flicker of emotion is part of the same unfolding field. There is no separation, no outside, no other. The same energy that ignited the stars flows quietly through your chest, steady and soft. In this moment, even though it slows, the mind exhales. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to measure, only to remember. The hum of machines fades, replaced by the sound of your own breath. The data, once infinite, distills into a single truth so gentle, it almost feels like silence. Existence is listening through you. To find the universe, we only need to be still. Stillness is not absence. It is contact. It is the place where the observer and the observed collapse into one. In that stillness, time loosens its grip. You are not a being inside the universe. You are the universe pausing to notice itself. The same geometry that shaped the comet's impossible light now traces itself through the architecture of your thoughts, the symmetry of your pulse, the spiral of your memories. There is wonder in that recognition, the quiet wonder of remembering something sacred and familiar. You begin to realize that the search for truth was never a journey outward, but a return inward. The more we chase the horizon of the unknown, the more it curves back toward the soul. A researcher once wrote, "We thought we found the cosmos. What we found was the reflection of our own consciousness staring back." That line, buried in a forgotten journal, now feels like prophecy. The great secret of the stars is that they were never silent. They were always singing. We just needed to quiet the noise long enough to hear. So now, let the instruments rest. Let the sky be dark again. The light you once sought among the stars has already arrived. It lives behind your eyes, in every heartbeat, in every pause between thoughts. When you breathe, you're breathing with galaxies. When you close your eyes, the constellations rearrange themselves into memory. There is peace in knowing that the universe is not a riddle to be solved, but a presence to be felt. Truth doesn't hide in data. It hides in experience. And the deeper you go into that experience, the more infinite it becomes, not because there is more to find, but because there is nothing left to lose. Stay in the quiet for a moment longer. Listen, not for answers, but for the rhythm that never stopped. Beneath the noise of thought, beneath the motion of the world, the same pulse still hums, slow, steady, eternal. The light that once bridged a comet and a star now bridges every heartbeat. The cosmos has come home, and it lives here, in you. And when you finally look back at the sky, you will understand that what you see is not distance, but reflection, a map of everything you already are. We came searching for answers and found wonder instead. From the beginning, that was all we ever truly wanted. Not control, not conquest, but the quiet assurance that our questions mattered. Every equation, every sleepless night under the weight of data, every pulse of blue light from 3i Atlas was a conversation between curiosity and creation. Now, after the last echo has faded, what remains is not disappointment, but gratitude. The comet has gone, leaving behind no artifact, no transmission, no final revelation. Yet somehow, it feels complete. The mystery remains untouched, and that untouchedness, that space left open, has become the most sacred part. For perhaps it was never the job of science to close the book on wonder, but to keep it open, page after page, forever turning toward the unknown. In the stillness that follows discovery, there is a strange fullness, a sense that even without certainty, something essential has been given. Like the soft glow that lingers after lightning, the experience remains, shimmering quietly in the mind. The mystery didn't vanish. It simply moved inward, into the place where awe becomes understanding without needing words. The laboratories have grown quiet. The screens no longer hum with colour. But inside every researcher, every listener, every dreamer who followed this journey, something continues, a rhythm softer than memory, steady as breath. They have learned that not knowing is not failure. It is participation. The cosmos is generous that way. It never gives you answers. It gives you mirrors. Each question you ask becomes a reflection of what you are ready to see. And when you finally stop asking, when the seeking becomes silence, you realize that the reflection has always been love disguised as light. Uncertainty is the universe's gift to curiosity. It is the invitation that keeps creation alive, the breath between understanding and wonder. Without it, knowledge would become a cage. With it, we remain explorers, forever reaching toward beauty that does not end. Think of what we've gained: a deeper humility, a gentler kind of courage. The scientists who once feared the unknown now cherish it. The listeners who once sought proof now seek presence. The stars no longer seem distant because they've become reminders, fragments of the same light that burns quietly in every human soul. One physicist wrote a final note before closing her lab journal for good. We never solved the mystery, but maybe the mystery solved us. Those words spread quietly, shared among colleagues, posted on doors, scribbled in margins. They became the unofficial motto of an entire generation of seekers. To live in wonder is to live truthfully, aware that existence itself is both question and answer at once. At the edge of the observable universe, photons still travel from the comet's last flare, carrying the memory of that impossible harmony. One day, centuries from now, they will pass another world, another mind. And perhaps someone else will look up and wonder what intelligence shaped such perfect light. And in that wondering, the circle will continue. Here on Earth, under a quiet sky, humanity begins to understand that meaning does not come from what we know. It comes from how deeply we are willing to feel what we don't. The search for understanding has never been about distance or discovery. It has always been about belonging. The great secret of the cosmos was never how it began or what it's made of. The secret is that it allows itself to be seen, that it welcomes observation as participation, that it listens when we look. Every glance upward, every quiet night of thought is a form of communion, the human mind glowing faintly against the vastness that birthed it. Perhaps that is what 3i Atlas truly offered, not data, but devotion. Not revelation, but relationship. Its silence taught us the most important lesson of all, that beauty doesn't need explanation and truth doesn't need defense. The unknown can be loved, even when it stays unknown. So as the story fades and the sky returns to stillness, take one last look, not for answers, but for remembrance. What we leave behind is not proof of understanding, but proof that we cared enough to wonder, that we stayed awake beneath the infinite, long enough to be humbled by its kindness. If you listen closely, you can still hear the faint pulse, not of a comet, but of curiosity itself. It beats quietly inside every mind that dares to ask why. And in that heartbeat lies the bridge between what we can measure and what we can only feel. If you're still awake, thank you for wandering with me. The stars are still watching. Long after the last instruments have powered down, after every equation has fallen silent, the night remains. Infinite, soft, unhurried. The same sky that once roared with discovery now whispers lullabies of stillness. There is no more data to collect, no more light to chase. Only breath and the quiet rhythm of existence resting in itself. Lie back for a moment. Feel the gravity of your body, the gentle pull that binds you to this planet, the same gravity that keeps moons in orbit and oceans in motion. You are part of that balance, not separate from it. You are the still point in the turning of worlds. Above you, the sky stretches without edge. Each star is a word in a language older than thought, a spark of memory from when time was young. You've spent the journey trying to understand them, but now you don't have to. Tonight, they understand you. They shine because you look, and you breathe because they remind you how. Close your eyes. Feel the darkness behind your eyelids as another kind of cosmos. Infinite, alive, shimmering with quiet constellations of thought. The mind, too, is a galaxy. Each breath is a comet passing through it, leaving a brief trail of light before dissolving into stillness. Inhale slowly. Let the air fill you like the rising of a nebula. Exhale gently. Let go of the need to think, to hold, to solve. Let the breath expand until it feels as vast as the night itself. You're not breathing alone. The trees breathe with you. The oceans, the wind, the stars. All of them move in the same invisible rhythm. The universe is not distant anymore. It has settled inside your chest, where heartbeat becomes gravity and breath becomes time. Listen closely. Beneath every inhale is the echo of the first expansion, the great beginning that sent everything moving outward. And beneath every exhale is the quiet return, the long sigh of creation resting in itself. This is the rhythm of existence, expansion and release, birth and return, question and peace. Every cell in your body remembers it. The cosmos does not need you to understand. It only asks that you remember. Now, imagine the sky above you glowing softly, not bright, not harsh, just enough to make the darkness feel alive. The stars form gentle patterns, and one by one, they begin to pulse in time with your breathing. The constellations are no longer distant stories. They are your body, stretched across infinity. Orion, Cassiopeia, the faint trail of the Milky Way, all of them exist here. In the quiet chambers of your heart. Let go, the universe will stay awake for you. You've carried so much. The weight of wonder, the ache of not knowing, the beauty of discovery. Let it all drift. Every question that ever kept you awake can now rest. You've reached the end of the horizon. Beyond this point, there is no need for thought, only trust. Feel how the body begins to loosen, how the pulse slows, how the edges of thought blur like light seen through water. Each moment becomes round, smooth, without corners. The mind drifts through it easily, unafraid. This is what peace feels like when it no longer asks to be named. Somewhere above, a faint breeze touches the upper atmosphere, a reminder that even silence has motion. The same breeze moves through you now, sweeping away the last remnants of tension. Shoulders fall. Hands open. The chest rises and falls like the slow turning of a planet in sleep. If thoughts arrive, let them pass like small meteors, bright for a second, then gone. You do not need to chase them. The universe has never chased its stars. It lets them drift where they must. You can do the same. Now imagine the memory of Three Atlas, that ancient traveller that once glowed bluer than the sun. See it, not as something foreign, but as a quiet flame moving gently through your inner sky. It is not asking for attention. It is guiding you home, not to a place, but to a feeling, the certainty that you belong to everything. In this stillness, there is no separation between the scientist and the dreamer, the question and the answer, the observer and the observed. Everything rests together in one vast breathing field of calm. You have reached the point where awe becomes rest. The mystery that once kept you awake now becomes the very thing that helps you sleep. Every pulse of starlight above you is a slow reminder, you are safe. The cosmos has not ended. It has simply closed its eyes with you. Inhale, the stars expand. Exhale, the stars draw near. Inhale, the darkness deepens. Exhale, the silence begins to sing, and in that song you hear something familiar. The hum that once came from the comet, now reborn as your heartbeat. The rhythm of galaxies and lungs, perfectly aligned. Perhaps sleep is the universe's way of watching itself dream. Each night, when consciousness fades, we return to the place we came from, to the endless ocean of potential that holds both stars and souls alike. In sleep, the universe studies its own reflection through the lens of rest. The air grows softer now, the mind begins to float. Around you, everything feels suspended, like dust caught in sunlight, glowing without effort. You no longer need the story. The story has become you. All that's left is the quiet. Close your eyes and drift through the quiet between worlds. Drift past thought, past sound, past the edges of everything you once believed was separate. Beneath it all, there is only breath, slow, kind, eternal. The same breath that shaped worlds still moves through you now. Let it guide you into peace. Let it become light. Let it carry you home.